Okay, this is the video lecture for political geography at the sub-state level. So we're kind of talking about the provincial level and the administration of government within those different provinces, or certainly below the state level. So we're gonna kind of start off with the state level and kind of work our way down a little bit, and then we'll talk about some other things as well. But the first level that we're going to talk about is, what if you have government where the central government has 100% of the power, nearly 100% of the power? Then there is no provincial government. That's called a unitary state. Okay, so a unitary state, for your definition, is one in which the central government has either all of 100% or the vast majority of political power within a state. In other words, there's no local government. There is no regional divisions. It's all just one government. And so there's no local government, state government, or in our case, or provincial government. It's just national government. And there's a couple of reasons why this happens. Could be one, like you're China and you want to just control your entire country and not let other areas like maybe Tibet make decisions. Or it could be in the case of something like Iceland, where you have really kind of a small country. You don't need those divisions. You're pretty homogenous from an ethnic standpoint. And so you don't need to give those regional areas kind of their own autonomy to stay happy. Everybody's kind of on the same page. All right, so there's some examples from you. North Korea would be unitary, China, Iceland. I believe, looking at my map here, the countries or the states in green, they're going to have federal systems, and the one in blue would have unitary systems. Okay. If you do have elements of some kind within your state that really kind of require more attention, in other words, they don't agree with the national or the country's agenda, and let's say that they're different ethnically, they speak a different religion, maybe, or speak a different language, or practice a different religion, then they may want to have their own rules, and they may threaten to leave the country. And if you are the central government or you're the main government, you may want to keep this group happy, and you want to keep them in the country for whatever reason. Maybe maybe it's just you want to have centripetal forces instead of centrifugal forces. Maybe this group has resources in their land, and you don't want to lose those lands, or you don't have to fight over that land. And so what you do is you grant them a certain amount of autonomy, of freedom, of self-determination, so that they can basically rule themselves but still be in your country. And so you may not mess with local rules too much, and just kind of let them do whatever they want to do. And so if you go back to like the 1990s, Canada had a vote in Quebec where they were going to decide to leave Canada or stay in Canada, become an independent country. And they narrowly voted to stay in, but Canada has given Quebec a tremendous amount of local autonomy and really has become kind of an autonomous region. And so depending on the particular state you're talking about, autonomous regions, they may be almost like independent countries within that particular state. And they may have different rules, different laws that are different from the rest of the state. Okay, but typically we see autonomous regions around the world, to keep the peace ethnically. Now you've seen like Hong Kong. Hong Kong is really technically a part of China, but as the British controlled Hong Kong, they had special rules financially, economically for Hong Kong, that the tax brackets were different, the rules for companies, for foreign direct investment were different, and so it could be done economically, but really in Unit 3 we're kind of talking about ethnically. Okay, so we see this in the United States a little bit to some degree, where Native Americans have kind of their own rules, and a good example of this would be somewhat in the form of gambling, what they can choose the games that they want to issue in their casinos or have in their casinos, and just things like that. Okay. Now, a federal state, as opposed to a unitary state, is where the power is shared between the central government and some sort of local government, a regional government, a provincial government, and in our case, kind of in a sense, 3 different levels. So, power shared between the central government, the provincial government, and then also in the the local government and the town government as well. Now, there are probably better examples that you can use for a federal state. I think Nigeria is a really good one. India is a good federal state. Mexico is a good federal state. The United States is a federal state, but here's the key thing that I want you to remember for a federal state. Typically speaking, a federal state is such when it is done to kind of mitigate or reduce ethnic tension. And so you'll see this like in Nigeria, where you've got tons of different ethnic groups. You've got Muslims in the north, you've got Christians for the most part in the south, and they want to keep all those people happy. And so to do that, they give them, kind of local autonomy. And it's not probably as autonomous as like an autonomous region, but if there's an issue that applies to really only that group, then they can go ahead and take of that group, make a law about that, and it doesn't really affect the other groups. Okay. So again, you're welcome to use the United States, but I think there's better examples of a true federal state, rather than the U.S. Okay, devolution. And so when you have a federal state, usually what happens is you go from a unitary state where the central government holds 100% of the power, and to keep groups happy, like the ones in Quebec, then you devolve powers. You allow that central government to weaken at its expense to the provincial level or the regional level. And so devolution is a process by which regions in a given state obtain more autonomy, more power, more freedom at the expense of the central government. And again, going back to Quebec, this is what happened there, where they were more of a centralized government, and to keep the Quebecois happy, then they devolved powers to them. And so then Quebec started making laws like, well, you could only have, signs printed in French. And you can see this with the Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's a great example. Again, this is usually done to keep ethnicities happy. Okay, next concept. A failed state. What if nothing helps and your state just kind of falls apart? At the extreme end is what we call a failed state. So a failed state is a government that fails, basically. And it fails because for a number of reasons, they can't provide adequate services, maybe clean drinking water, electricity, schools, healthcare, things like that. They have very little ability to interact with other states. They can't protect trade. Other states don't want to deal with them in foreign affairs. Maybe the leaders of other countries, they don't know who the true leaders are, so they're not willing to speak to anybody. Maybe you're not recognized by another country. There's a lot of, it's kind of like a sliding scale. So you have, on one end, you have states that are the most stable. They have the best government in terms of there's very little corruption. They provide great services. They send their kids to college. It's paid for by taxes. They have the ability to collect taxes. They have the ability to create infrastructure. Those are the signs of a very strong, robust government. On the other end of that, you have, countries like Afghanistan or Somalia, that they are countries, but boy, barely. And, like in Somalia, they have clans in there that would be kind of equivalent to our mafia. And those clans are probably more powerful than the military in Somalia. The northern part of Somalia has kind of broke itself away from Somalia proper and call itself Somaliland. They have a more stable currency and probably more stable government, and they're not even recognized by the rest of the world as an actual country. And if you think about, let's say that Colorado got upset with the federal government and tried to secede or try to leave the union, would our government be able to stop them from doing that? And if the 1860s proved us anything, the answer there is yes. But with a failed state, this wouldn't happen. Now, if you're kind of interested in this and you want to kind of see which states are more stable, which states are kind of considered more on the failed side of the sliding scale, the United States is not the most stable government. We have obviously political corruption to a certain degree. We don't send our kids to college. We don't have health care for the poor very well. Those are all things that kind of hurt our score. But then there's obviously worse countries than us, like Haiti. I've mentioned Afghanistan and Somalia. So if you're interested in this, you just Google failed state index. It'll take you to a website. You can probably check this out. Okay, now we're going to get into kind of administering government at the provincial level. And so I'm going to start with this thing called apportionment. Apportionment is how much power that each of your areas have in terms of the national scene. And so, like in terms of like Colorado, we have a certain amount of power in our government, our provincial government, as it relates to the national government, but not as much as like California or Texas or Florida. And our apportionment is done at the by population. And so the larger the population is, technically speaking, the more power that you have in government. Now you can see here that our national level has been broken down into a different scale at the provincial level. And each of these 50 provinces that you see here, they make laws in their own area, laws that do not affect the greater part of the whole, or laws that are specifically for Colorado, such as the driving age limit is 16. That may not be the driving age limit of Wyoming. Wyoming gets to set that. So again, when we look at governance of the provincial level, this is something that you see on a province to province basis. Okay, now in terms of how these provinces have power as it relates to the national government, you can see that in the House of Representatives, it's based on population. So the states with the larger population, the provinces with the larger population, they're going to have more power. They get more seats. Now, every 10 years, and this is kind of important to listen to, every 10 years, our government does a census. In fact, they just did one. And from that census, they count up the population. And if you are one of the provinces that has grown the most, you may get a seat. Now, right now it's topped out. You can't, there's 435 seats, and there can be no 436 or 437. So basically what has to happen is one province has to lose a seat by losing population, and whoever the fastest growing province would be, they get that seat. So an example of this would be like in 2010, Michigan, who had more than 15 seats, they went through an economic depression. A lot of people moved out of Michigan. And then when they did the census in 2010, Michigan lost those seats and other states ended up getting them. Okay, so where you need to kind of pick up with your key term slides is then going to be this idea of redistricting within a province. So after they do that census, it'll tell you how many seats you have. But within your province, if your population changes in some way, you after the census, you have to rework your congressional districts. And so because we have a certain population, roughly speaking, this is rough, but for every 500,000 people you have in your state or your province, that's how many congressional districts you get, and that's how many people you get to send to the House of Representatives. So we had, at the time that the seats were given out, we had roughly 3.5 million people. Now, we actually have more than that now, but since the number's capped out at 435, we probably won't get another district unless we grow insanely big and other states start to lose pretty bad. So right now we have 7 congressional districts. And the way that these are drawn, our government has to use 2 rules. One is these districts have to contain roughly the same amount of population. And if you create a district and you have counties that are included in it, they must be contiguous. In other words, if you're going to add another county, you have to add one that's right next to the existing ones. Okay. And so, if you're in the 3rd district there, you could not add another county that's way up in the northeastern part, almost near Nebraska. They have to be contiguous, and you can see from the map that they are. The smaller districts, they're the ones that have, a large population. And so to make the 3rd district as large as the 1st district in terms of population, they have to include more and more areas. So what these large districts tell you is these are rural areas and they don't have a lot of people. Now, the people who get to draw the districts are usually the party that's in power of the state government at the time. So, right now in Colorado, that would be the Democrats. So after the census, as our population changes and as these districts get bigger or smaller, even though there's still 7 of them, the Democrats are going to get to draw the districts. And so as long as they follow those 2 rules that you see there, must contain the same amount of population and be contiguous, they can kind of draw them however they want. And sometimes this leads political parties to doing something that's pushing the line of whether it's legal or not. And that's called gerrymandering. And so gerrymandering is when a political party redraws the districts to their benefits. And they do this to try to, and there's a couple of techniques. They can do what's called stacking or packing, where they're trying to get as many of their party into a district so that they ensure that they're going to win an election no matter what. Or they can do what's called cracking. And cracking is when you are trying to break the power of a political party in a particular area. And so you can see here, and it's really not important, but probably this is a Democrat district where they have kind of creatively drawn, and you can see that it's contiguous because it keeps going, but they have gone through and tried to make sure that they include all the people in that particular political party in that area of Chicago. The term actually comes from a long time ago in the 1800s. There was a guy by the name of Elbridge Gerry, and he was kind of the first guy that practiced this. And so now it gets tagged to his name. It's kind of an ignominious distinction where if you redraw your boundaries to benefit your party, it is called gerrymandering. Okay, last concept, a special district. So now we're really diving down into administration or governance at the local level. And what you're looking here is what's called a special district. And so a special district, a lot of times they will cross over city lines or county lines, but a special district is really made to administer space for some sort of like service, okay? So that could be maybe like water, it could be electricity, it could be transportation, so like RTD or something like that. But school districts are a great example of a special district. And so the people in southeastern Aurora, many of them did not want to be a part of Aurora Public Schools. The voters in much of Aurora Public Schools weren't willing to increase their taxes on themselves to provide better schools. And so, as you can see, this group of people in southeastern Aurora, they made their own boundary that kind of crossed between Aurora, parts of Denver, Centennial, Foxfield, unincorporated Aurora, and they all made this big district called Cherry Creek School District. And within Cherry Creek School District, the tax rates for property taxes are actually higher than outside of this area because the parents within this area believed it was important to give kids a good quality education. And so they actually get taxed higher. So, this is a great example. And a lot of times fire districts or emergency districts are special districts. But they, really, the key things you need to remember is this is how you administer space in terms of providing services. Again, whether that's water, emergency schools, or transportation. Okay. All right. That should be it in terms of political geography at the sub-state level. Thank you for tuning in.